talk today a little bit about this concept of imposters, the imposters. This is a new theory I'm working with. You're going to have to bear with me as I sort of tease it out. But I wanted to start this video off with a clip from the incredible episode of The Acolyte that we just watched. This clip shows you what I would like to describe as peak Disney. Not that Disney, I'm not one of those guys that's like, Disney's ruined Star Wars. No, Disney's done some good stuff with Star Wars. They've just done a lot of bad stuff also. But to be fair, George Lucas wasn't really doing a great job with it himself, especially when it came to the prequel movies, and then just the lack of any other kind of content, really, outside of, the extended universe books, which had a lot of, it was a mixed bag, and the cartoons, Clone Wars, Rebels, and I enjoyed those. But let's watch this amazing clip. This will show you just some of the genius that's going into the Acolyte and why it's just considered by many in the Star Wars fandom to be the best Star Wars content ever created. One, many, Sorry, that's my little Sesame Street reference there, if you didn't catch it. Wow, this is... Yeah. Now... Oh god, make it stop! Now, having witnessed that, you're going to tell me that if you were Osha, you don't want to be a witch? I'm not a witch, I'm your wife. No, you don't want to be a witch, you want to go do your own thing, and then you have to go to this ceremony where they're doing that shit? Like, who? I just want to know who on the Lucasfilm team, involved in the making of this show, who was it that was like, yeah, this is the chant we want our fucking witch coven to be. We can go back. Think back to Shakespeare and Macbeth, bubble, bubble, toil and trouble. I mean, the witches have a long history of being kind of badass, okay? Like, badass enough that they scared the shit out of enough people to have an inquisition to hunt them down in medieval Europe. And now I know that's a lot more complicated than actual witches. Then there was the Salem witch trials. I mean, honestly, like, witches. The Witch of Sandwich. Witches are fertile soil for story. They really are. I mean, I'm all for like a coven of witches in Star Wars. That could be really cool. The problem with this is that it's just done so badly. And I'm not going to beat up on this episode too much more. But really, it's. I was thinking about this. So like a lot of the problem people have with Star Wars these days is sort of the rise of, for lack of a better term, wokeness. Now, I don't love the word woke. I don't like it because it's used so imprecisely these days. It's kind of become a catch-all or just like this. It's like this word to describe anything you don't like. Oh, I didn't like that. It was too woke. I mean, that could mean anything now. But I will start with definitions. What I see as, what the drinker would call like the message, or what people used to call social justice warriors, is this rise in identity politics that it's relatively new and modern, right? That has kind of dominated both the left, pushing out people like me. Not that I've been pushed to the right. I'm not a right winger. I am an alt left, I guess. I'm not. I don't agree with the vast majority of what I see. When I look at the left, I see a bunch of middle class to upper middle class, educated white liberals who are bored and have existential dread and are trying to like calm their guilt and their they're trying to like make excuses for their share of the wealth, of which many of them are part of the 1%, by embracing this brand of identity politics that's, anti-racism, radical gender politics, and then have abandoned what I would say are the main tenets of the left, for me personally, would be worker rights and kind of that big tent leftism where we're trying to balance labor against capital. The capitalists control the world. We need balance between labor and capital. We need some sort of equilibrium, or the world's going to suffer. People are going to suffer. So that's kind of my, like, the TLDR version of my personal politics. I have been, a supporter of, gay rights and, women's rights and all that other stuff as long as I can remember, since I had any sense of what rights even were. The thing about modern identity politics is that they really aren't, it really is so much more radicalized, and it's much less about actual rights. It's much less about creating a big tent where people can find common ground, and much, much more about this weird guilt and this weird idea of, like, if we can have this weird, like, social media reparation or something, where we cancel as many people who say the wrong things as possible, and we just insert as much of this brand of politics into all the media we can find and all the boardrooms we can find, then we'll make the world right. Even though it's generally this sort of top-down, unpopular, very aggressive, hostile kind of social politics that, I often say, like, if the gay movement had used this brand of politics, they would never have gone as far as they've gotten, because people would I think the gay movement did such a good job at portraying themselves as fun and as harmless and deserving of equality. And then you get this new modern brand of identity politics, which is just so aggressive and unpopular, and for a good reason, because it's trying to make everybody, it's trying to push a top-down agenda onto everybody else. And most people, although I think most people are generally fairly accepting, and most people are not, overtly racist or sexist. I mean, there is obviously there's going to be some racism and sexism in society, but I think most people, your average American, your average person in general, is not. And this brand of politics says, yes, you are. And here, we're going to shower this message down upon you every chance we can get. Like piss from the heavens. And so what's happened, right, is that we've seen this message, this messaging, this brand of identity politics infect everything in ways that are not, what I would say positive progress or that fit organically into the stories and the storytelling that's going on. So I always bring up Andor because I say this is a show that's super diverse, lots of strong female characters, lesbian relationship, lots of diversity, like skin colors, Black, Asian, everything. Hispanic. It's actually much more diverse than the Acolyte. But that diversity is just organically woven into the story. It's not, you don't have all these very on-the-nose, obvious things like, the white Jedi and the Acolyte taking the poison because he's guilty. Like, oh my God, it's white guilt. Or like, just this like, oh, we're going to have this show that has literally no white people in it. Obviously, you're going to create kind of a shitstorm when you do that sort of thing. Just like if you made a new Star Wars show with no minorities in it, that would create a shitstorm, and rightfully so. So, but I think that, like, what we're seeing is it's the real damage here is not that, there's more diverse shows. I don't think that's the issue. What I think is that what's happening is that corporate boardrooms, marketing departments, the bigwigs at these entertainment studios are thinking to themselves, oh, this is the future. This is the future of entertainment, right? This is what, whether people want it or not, this is what we're going for now. We're going to go for this because we've been pressured into it, because this is the zeitgeist and we're going to go along with it, or because we think we can, but also because we think this will sell. And if we can, we can't rely on this, this old audience, right? We can't rely on the fans of Star Wars that are the reason that Star Wars is popular. We can't rely on them anymore. We need to create new fans. And I don't know if they've misjudged terribly, because if they lose the old fans, and the new fans don't stick around, then they're kind of screwed. But we can't predict what's going to happen, right? But from my perspective, this is probably what's going to happen. And like I've said this before, but my kids and my now ex-girlfriend, but when we were still together, A lot of the new Marvel stuff and the new Star Wars stuff, none of them wanted to watch that anymore. It was just me watching it for work. Back in the day, like even back to Mandalorian season 1, or even the sequel trilogy and, the Avengers movies, we were all watching that stuff together. But as these shows and movies have moved towards, and not because they've moved towards greater inclusiveness, but because the focus has shifted away from creating great stories to just, these weird, bizarre notions that like we have to make, the Force is female and stuff. No, it's really not. It's great if there are female characters in Star Wars, but you can't say shit like the Force is female and then start pushing shows that completely sideline all your male characters. Because quite frankly, honestly, a lot of women would also like to see great male characters, just like a lot of men would like to see the great female characters. We'd like a mixture of that. And what I've come to the conclusion is that when I describe the imposters, I'm not talking about people who aren't fans, right? I think a lot of these people, like the creator, the showrunner of The Acolyte, I believe that she's a fan. I don't disbelieve her when she says she's a fan. I actually had somebody get angry at me on Twitter and point out that like she likes the extended universe stuff and she's been a fan forever. Okay. There's like millions of Star Wars fans. Do I think they should all be put in charge of these shows? Absolutely not. And that's the problem. The imposters that I'm talking about aren't necessarily not fans, even if I disagree with what's good about the show with them. They are not good storytellers. They are not good filmmakers. And they are placing a priority on the agenda rather than on the quality of the story and of the TV show and the movies that they're making. And this is a huge, huge problem. When you're going into a Star Wars show and your first thought is, I want to push, I want to make this, LGBTQ. I want to make this diverse. It's DEI is my priority here. And that's where your framework that's your leaping off point. And that's the thing that you're pushing the most. Well, you're going to fail. I said this years and years ago when I was writing more about politics. I wrote about, I was actually in some kind of round table with the pajamas media people. I don't even know if they're around anymore. Anyways, a bunch of conservatives. But I kind of argued that, and I've argued this since and many times, but I argued that conservatives suck at creating good art because they, and this is, this is 15 years ago, right? But this 15 years ago was before before the rise of the woke movement or whatever. I feel, okay, I'm losing track. Conservatives have been in this position of the underdog in terms, not in terms of like the population, but in terms of like social capital or entertainment media. Like conservatism is clearly not the dominant when it comes to entertainment, right? There are conservatives in entertainment, actors, producers, filmmakers, but the dominant politics of Hollywood and of everything we see have been for a long time liberal. And so what I think that's done to a lot of conservative artists and filmmakers and whatnot has created this need to be political in their art overtly. So you see a lot of very bad, over the years, you've seen a lot of very bad like attempts at conservative art that have fallen flat. Because if you're going into art, you're going into film, you're going into music or anything with politics at the forefront of what you're trying to do, you're just pretty much making propaganda. And propaganda is never very good when you judge it in terms of its artistic value. And that's the problem that I see with a lot of the rise of wokeness, right? It's not that there's anything inherently wrong with wanting more diversity. There's nothing wrong with wanting more, female characters. Obviously, if you're going to, I'm glad that like fantasy fiction hasn't just kept doing what Tolkien did, which is like basically very few, almost to the point of almost no female characters. I'm so glad that in Game of Thrones and other stories, we have all these great characters like Arya and, The problem is if you go into these stories and into these projects thinking this is what we're trying to achieve, not tell a good story, but we're trying to achieve this political message, this political agenda, you are just making propaganda. And the problem is if you start hiring people that are doing that, if Disney keeps on hiring showrunners and writers whose primary agenda is an agenda rather than to tell a great story, you're creating propaganda. And that's why I'm describing these people making these things as imposters, because they're not storytellers. They're not artists. They're propagandists. And doesn't matter what politics you're pushing, whether it's conservative, whether it's woke, whatever it is. If you're pushing those politics, you are a propagandist. You are an imposter, not an imposter in terms of the fandom. You might be a huge fan of Star Wars, but if you're pushing a political agenda instead of trying to make a great Star Wars story, then you're an imposter. And that's what I'm seeing in The Acolyte. That's what I saw in Obi-Wan with the sidelining of Obi-Wan Kenobi, making him to be this puttering old fool. Well, and it didn't even matter that it was just, this little girl and these women that were all taking the spotlight. It could, sidelining the main character, that's a bad idea no matter who's doing it. But this is kind of what I see. And I see this in Night Country, with True Detective. They brought in this new showrunner who clearly had she was in way over her head. And I don't know, I use propagandist loosely. Like, I don't even think all these people realize that they're propagandists, right? This is just the social moment. People are like so obsessed with politics now and with like showing people that they're in the fucking like cool kids club and that they can push the social agenda too, that they do that without even thinking of how it might harm their work, right? I don't think that TV shows or movies have to be apolitical. There's lots of great political dramas and thrillers and everything, but when Andor is a deeply political show, but it's not agenda driven, it's story driven, within the framework of Revolution. But Night Country, and then we see it in The Witcher, we see it through all of these different properties. In Marvel, we see it, She-Hulk, over and over and over again. We see people who are clearly in over their heads, not good at what they're doing. They are not great showrunners or producers. They are not great writers. They are, and they do not, George R. R. Martin recently wrote about how 99 times out of 100, these screenwriters who come in and want to make it their own, make it worse. And I totally agree with him, George R. R. Martin, I think everyone knows who that is, but the author of A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, and he had a whole rant on Facebook basically saying like, this is so arrogant. It doesn't usually work. And then he said it can. Like Shogun, he really liked, and I agree. Like I think they did a great job with Shogun. I think you have to in adaptation change things, but again, those changes should be because you want to make it more, you want to make it work better on the screen. You want to make it more authentic, not that you want to push this agenda. So that's my idea, my budding notion of, like I said, the drinker has this idea of the message. Well, this is like, I've been thinking about this as like, who's doing this? And it's not just about wokeness or identity politics. That's the thing that's happening now. It could be it could be any kind of politics though. If you're bringing that into your art and you're bringing that into the entertainment that they're creating for audiences, it's not what most audiences want. And so they have to convince us with propaganda. And then, you see the backlash. Like I go and I write a review of The Acolyte and, people, their knee-jerk reaction is that I'm some horrible bigot or something, right? And so I have to fall all over myself to be like, look, I love Andor. It's super diverse. You guys are acting like a cult. And then this gets into like gatekeeping and all of that. Like I don't believe necessarily in gatekeeping, but I do think that it's very, very, it's frustrating and it's arrogant to come into a fandom, to come into something like Star Wars and then say, all you shitheads who are here before are the problem. You're a bunch of gatekeepers and bigots. And we are going to change this thing that you, the fans, made successful in the first place. We're going to bend it to our vision of what it ought to be and screw what came before. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be change. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be progress. I'm not saying that more people shouldn't be allowed into the fandom. Again, I'm not a gatekeeper, but I do think that that's a two-way street and you've got to respect what came before. And when you look at these, when you look at the disaster that was The Witcher, when you look at the way that True Detective Night Country just shat all over True Detective and everything it stood for. When you look at where Star Wars has gone, outside of a few isolated examples, it's this disregard for the work, for the source material. Rings of Power, look at what they did to Tolkien. Look, like it's this disregard for the source material, for the fans. And then when the fans strike back, they're labeled as gatekeepers or bigots or racist, sexist, whatever trolls, incels, basement dwellers, mouth breathers, neckbeards, blah, 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 blah. And some of them are. That's the thing. When you get online, like you get a sample size large enough, there are actual racists. There are a bunch of really fucking socially awkward nerds. There are all those things too. But look, man, I grew up on Star Wars. When I went and saw the first of the prequel movies, I was so excited I could barely contain myself, and it broke my heart. Like, I am no defender of George Lucas. I think the prequel movies are a travesty, and I think Star Wars really, outside again of a few isolated examples, has been dead for a very long time. So, but these other shows, The Witcher could have been great. Game of Thrones didn't have to end the way it did. What we need is quality, And anyways, that's all I have to say about that. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching. I always appreciate you. Peace.